suggesting they were reporting or that the cameras were on, but they were certainly in eyeshot of the jury. In fact, we were much further away from the media than the jury was. So I just wanted to get that on the record. In addition to that, the lead detective in this case, Phil Stoddard, was also outside and present, standing in the area where the lawyers were. We had specifically objected to Detective Stoddard or anybody from Cobb Police, but nonetheless, he was out there. So I'm gonna just put that on the record as well. Thank you.
All right, well, that can be on the record. That's the reason that I pushed y'all back in the corner, as far as I pushed y'all back in the corner. Mr. Sharon, since there's been a question about the media, would you put on the record what the directions were that I gave you regarding that?
The direction that the court gave all of the media was that they were to cut off all of the viewing of the cameras, both video and still shots, before the jurors were even escorted downstairs. When I went into the building to escort the jurors down, that's when all cameras were shut down. There were media present, but they had no way of recording any of their jurors or what they were doing.
And as a matter of fact, members of, ladies and gentlemen of the press are closer to the jurors in this courtroom than they were outside. But those observations of the defense are on the record and noted for the record. Does the state have anything they'd like to put on the record in this regard?
No, Your Honor.
Very good. Let's bring the jurors.
All rise for the jury. Please watch your step. Please watch your step.
Whoever's in the trial now, call your next witness.
Judge, before we do that, I had Major Lewis with the Glenn County Sheriff's Office remove State's Exhibit Sticker 650, which was to document the Hyundai Tucson defendant's vehicle. So this time I'm going to present this to your clerk and ask that that be substituted and made part of the record to document the jury view.
You may do so. Proceed for the state.
Today we call Angela Cornett.
I do. Have a seat, please.
Ms. Cornett, would you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury by telling them your name and then spelling it so the court reporter gets it correct?
My name is Angela Cornett, first name Angela, last name Cornett.
And Ms. Cornett, you don't ask you where you live. You don't have to give me your address, but what part of the state do you live in?
Marietta, Georgia.
I'm going to turn your attention back to spring of 2014. Were you using any messaging apps back then named Scout or anything of that nature?
I was on Scout, yes.
Okay, and when you were on Scout, did you come into contact or start conversations with a person by the screen name Bama XH, as much as you remember?
I don't remember the screen name, honestly.
Okay, do you remember the person that you actually started the conversation with?
I do.
Okay, and who was that as you knew him?
The name is, I just remember as RJ.
Okay.
I don't remember actually being told a first name, no last name at all.
Okay. When you communicated with this person back on Scout, preliminarily, just generally, what was the type of conversations?
Purely sexual.
And was it kind of back and forth during that time?
Somewhat, yeah. It was just mainly, I was looking for just dating casually. It seemed more of a type hookup that he wanted.
Okay. Did you find out that he was actually married during this time?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did he tell you he had a child?
No.
When he said he was married, did he describe basically, that he was married, he was unhappy with his sex life, but he had no other?
I'm gonna object to leading.
It is.
I'll rephrase it. What did he say as far as you remember about his marriage, if anything?
When he told me he was married, I asked if he was unhappy.
Mhm.
He had told me no, that he wasn't. I believe I remember a statement saying that he just wanted to sleep with as many different women as possible.
And you know the incident while we're here, the date, June 18, 2014.
Yes.
In relation to that, how long was that? A couple of days or a couple of months before June 18, 2014, as best you recall?
It was a few months.
At some point, how long did you initially talk with him? Was this a matter of days before you stopped talking, or more, or how do you remember it?
Well, I had an old phone when I originally talked to him on Scout. That phone, I had deleted the Scout app from that phone, and the phone actually got damaged in water. I had replaced that phone, and then about 2.5 months after I received that phone, that's when I downloaded Scout again. Just so happened to be that day, probably about 10-15 minutes after I had downloaded the app again and logged into my account is when I received a message.
Okay, I understand. And during the time earlier, did the defendant ever make any requests for you to meet up with him or anything like that?
When I first talked to him, yes.
Okay. And did you ever meet him in person or anything of that nature?
No.
Okay. It was just because you kind of had different purposes than he did on the app?
So I guess so. He gave me kind of a creepy feeling, kind of sketchy. He seemed a little adamant on trying to just meet up and just get sexual favors from me, and I just wasn't interested in that.
Okay. I'm going to turn your attention to, you said you reconnected with him on Scout sometime later. Did you, after he messaged you on Scout, did you guys start using a different platform or a different application?
We did. We used the messenger app of Kik.
Had you already had a Kik account at that point?
Yes, I did.
And when you messaged him, basically, was this the day of the incident? It was one day of messaging on Kik?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to I've shown defense counsel what I marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 925. And Ms. Cornett, your screen name at the time was Dark Phoenix 1982, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And looking at these conversations on Kik, do you see that username as BamaXH?
Yes.
And have you reviewed these chats, and are these the chats that you had with that person you had met on Scout previously?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, I would tender State's Exhibit 924 at this time.
Any objection?
Yes, Judge, same objections that we previously made to this category of evidence.
Yes, sir. They vetted over those objections.
Thank you. And, ma'am, I think the jury's probably exhausted from a lot of the conversations with some of these messaging, so I'm going to kind of go through it with you, get you to paraphrase the discussions.
Okay.
Did the discussions actually start at 2:38 p.m.?
Yes.
And who was the first person, how did you message him?
I just said, sup.
Okay, SUP?
Yes.
Okay. And did he message you back?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And then you talked about, what did he say, what did you tell him you were doing that day?
I was working.
Okay. And what did he tell you, the next two messages?
He told me he was working as well, and he was bored and horny.
And after there is some more back and forth conversation, sexual in nature, at 2:46 p.m., did he actually tell you, he's like, I almost got basically oral sex that day?
Yes, he did.
And then the person got scared, he thinks?
Yes.
Okay. Now, after that, did he ask you if you wanted to see a picture or something on his body?
Yes, he did.
And was that a picture of his penis?
Yes.
And did he send you a photograph?
Yes.
Okay. And then was there further sexual conversation?
There was just briefly, he made
And was
a
this-
comment.
Go ahead, you can, why don't you just go ahead and read what was said and who said it so it can be put in context, okay?
Okay. He said he wanted to come ASAP. I told him to masturbate.
And what did he say after that?
He said I'd consider a glory hole, laugh out loud. I laughed. He says, I'm not kidding. I know where one is near the hooch. And that was the end of the conversation.
And what was the time of the last message that he sent to you there on June 18, 2014?
It was at 3:04 p.m.
Now, have you, after, I know initially we talked about you had never met him when you talked via Scout or anything like that. Have you ever met up with him at any point after anything like that?
No.
Okay. I think that's all I have, Judge.
Cross-examine.
Morning. All right, so you had spoken with Ross sometime in the spring on, you believe it was the Scout app?
Yes.
Okay. And as far as the communications went, I think what you've expressed to us was, what you understood for him, it was just about sex.
Yes.
Okay. He didn't want a relationship.
No.
Right. He did, he did tell you he was married,
Yes.
and what he indicated to you was that he said he was not unhappy. I just don't get what I need at home.
Briefly, yes. From what I remember, I don't remember exactly the words that he used.
Okay. And you took that to mean sex?
Yes.
Okay.
I do vividly remember the statement of him telling me that he wanted to sleep with as many different women as possible in his lifetime.
Okay. By any chance, did you tell that to the police?
Yes.
Okay. Who'd you tell that to?
I don't, I'm sorry, I don't remember the last name.
Okay.
I've talked to so many different people. It's been 2 years.
Okay.
So
How many interviews did you have with the police?
just one that it was June 20th.
Okay.
I was living with my mother at the time, so they came.
Right, and that was with Detective Stoddard,
Yes.
and you think that's when you made that statement?
I actually, I was so, I guess, frustrated, and I have pretty high anxiety, so it was very overwhelming at that time. He did say, if I remember anything at all, once I was able to calm down and process everything, I was able to remember that, and I don't know why I didn't remember that when he did come out and speak to me, but I did call him and tell him that.
Okay. You didn't mean to mislead him.
Right.
You didn't mean to lie. It was just something that you remembered a little bit later when you thought about it.
Right.
Okay. All right. And the conversation on June the 18th, that happened to be the day you re-engaged your Scout app?
Yes.
Okay. And it was just a very short conversation, some of it sexual in nature, right?
Yes.
And that afternoon, you told him that you had engaged in sexual relations with someone on Monday, and that it was fun.
Yes.
Right.
That was a lie, but okay.
Okay. All right. So you were lying to him?
Yes.
All right. And he immediately responded to you that he almost got fellatio that day?
Yes,
And you don't know if he was lying to you or not?
I have no clue.
You don't know if he was talking about Elizabeth Smith, who he had communicated with earlier that day?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Nothing further, Judge.
You can step in. Next witness.
Carrie Grimstead.
You're still in love. You can have a seat.
Thank you, Your Honor. Real quick topic. Yesterday evening, we had an opportunity to go through some photographs after you testified. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And I've got 4 photographs here that were taken, confirmed for me, before you removed the car seat as you were processing the vehicle back in 2014. And we have states 925, 926, 927, and 928.
That is correct.
Are these fair and accurate depictions of the car seat before it was initially removed back in 2014?
Yes, they are.
Okay. I think it was 925 through 928.
Admitted.
All right. Some of the photographs that we printed off of the sheriff's office apparently cut off the edge. Do you recognize these as being the full photographs that show the entirety of the seat that you took?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And just because you're asked about it yesterday about some sunglasses, 928, does that depict a pair of sunglasses that were on the back seat of that vehicle?
Yes, it does.
You ready to go home?
Yes, sir, I am.
All right, thank you, sir.
Cross-examine.
Lieutenant Grimstead is the first time you've had been called 3 times to testify in a trial before.
Yes, sir, it is.
Very good. In fact, you've been home and you've come back at least once already, is that fair to say?
That is correct, yes.
Well, let's be short, I believe. These photographs, these are some that you took from the very first time you processed the car, is that correct?
That is correct, during the initial search warrant of the vehicle.
They've been in your possession the entire time since then, over the past 2 years.
The photographs, no, they're referring to a CDR placed in the evidence.
They were on a CDR in your possession in the evidence room, correct?
Well, that is correct, they were in the evidence room.
Okay, great. And these actually show some, do you have them there with you?
No,
Where they
sir,
go?
I do not.
Oh. Could I see them, please, sir?
Sure.
They are tendered, correct?
Tendered and admitted.
Very good. These are, some of which are similar to ones that the defense has already put in, I believe. You recognize these you've been looking at before, showing the actual, the corner of the seat where it attaches. In fact, we see that strap we were talking about yesterday, the connector point to the, from the car seat to the child seat and to the actual car seat, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. And I think we've already seen a close-up of that. Defense number 8 is again another one of the photographs you took to make sure that was very well documented about how tight that seat was in, correct?
That is correct.
And when you put this car seat in, how many times have you put this car seat back in this car now? Back and forth?
At least 4 times.
At least 4. Only time you took a picture of that angle of that particular connector, or either one of the connectors, was the first time you processed it, correct?
is correct.
When you got the car seat out, do you remember reading the sticker that talked about the weight requirement of the car seats?
I don't recall if I read it. I know I saw it on there and I photographed it.
States 928, I think we can see it clear enough. You're able to see the sticker that's on the one on the right or the left as you look at it, indicates a 30-pound weight limit.
Yeah, I do see that number on there. That is correct.
And that's right next to this this orange button right there. You now know what that is, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
That's the thing that makes the extender go up and down, correct?
Yes, sir.
The sunglasses here, 928. You remember looking in the car and seeing if there was a place for sunglasses to be held in the car?
I'm not sure if there's one in the overhead or not.
Sure, there were cup holders in the front of the car, correct?
There are.
Dashboard, glove box, the center console. All
Yes,
those
sir.
are present. But these sunglasses were found, when you processed the car, they were found just laying there in the back seat, correct?
That is correct.
And you didn't touch them or move them when you took that picture. That's how you found it, correct?
That is correct.
And that was how the car was after Ross had come back there and gotten Cooper out of the car seat and had him trying to give him CPR, correct?
That was how the vehicle was when I first observed it.
Okay. You weren't on the scene to see that happen, I understand that, but as far as when you were told to come process it, was that your understanding, that's how the vehicle was found?
That's how the vehicle was when I got it. That is correct.
Very good. And the fact that those sunglasses were just kind of there on the car seat, did you document that in any way other than just take the photograph? In other words, did you make a report about it?
No, I did not.
Did you suggest to anybody or talk to anybody about how that appears to be consistent with them being in a rush to get to that car seat, to get the child out?
Judge, I think it would call for speculation.
Just it's argumentative, you can address it later.
Okay. Did you tell anybody about the sunglasses?
No, I didn't. There's many vehicles I've processed that there are sunglasses any number of places inside of vehicles.
But these are found right next to the car seat in the back seat, correct? Just as you have.
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
No further questions.
You good, Doug? Maybe not.
Have a safe trip. Keep your phone on.
Yeah.
And call your next witness, please.
Jim Persinger?
Please be seated.
Sir, if you will, introduce yourself to the jurors and spell your first and last name for our court reporter.
Jim, J-I-M, Persinger, P as in Paul, E-R-S-I-N-G-E-R,
And where are you employed, sir?
PM Investigations, Inc.
Okay, and what does PM stand for?
It's just the time of the night. When I first got involved with the work I do, I found most of my stuff was at night.
I want to talk a little bit about the work you do. What does PM, what does your company do specifically?
We specialize in digital forensics, cybercrime, creating software for law enforcement.
And how long have you been working in that capacity?
15 years.
Can you describe for the jury a little bit about your background and what brought you into that specialized area of practice?
I've been doing software development for about 30 years. I first started creating applications for kids with learning disabilities. I then left that arena and worked for Cobb County Police Department, where I retired.
What did you do with Cobb County Police?
I was a field training officer as well as the defensive tactics instructor.
Why don't you explain what those two positions entail with Cobb Police?
The defensive tactics was to teach an officer basically how to survive on the street. The field training officer was similar to that, except it dealt with everything from report writing to accident investigations, general investigations, to patrolling in that sort of environment.
How long were you a police officer in total?
About 10 years.
Okay. And did you have post-certification at the time?
I did.
Have you maintained that or now gone in a different direction with your career?
No, my certification is still current.
Okay, so you still are a post-certified police officer, just not working in that capacity.
Correct.
Why don't you describe thereafter what was the next step in your career progression leading to PM investigations?
Well, after I left, I went back into network administration and software development. But then I learned that I had a series of individuals that continued to hack the network of where I worked at. So I came up with a couple of techniques and enjoyed actually tracing and finding where people were coming from. So I knew that I had law enforcement on one hand, and I had the understanding of how data through the internet operated on the other hand. I came out with PM investigations.
All right, and since that time, have you been providing support not only to law enforcement, but also to defense attorneys as an expert witness?
I have.
And explain how somebody might engage you and what kind of work you've done with PM investigations.
I've done everything, not only in the criminal realm, but it's the civil as well, doing with intellectual property theft, child pornography, murder cases, drug cases, triangulation of cell phone services, again, recovery of data. I've done about 2,400 cases. I've been in touch with about 6,000 hard drives, memory sticks, flash drives, you name it, kind of devices. I've got some patents and trademarks and stuff that deal with that very same technology.
And have you invented any software that assists you in analyzing electronic devices?
I have. One of the most popular today is called Field Search. It's been around for about 10 years. It's got 15,000 downloads. The process is through the Department of Justice, who actually does the hosting of it. Any agent that has been verified as an actual agent can download it and give it to any of his peers within his group. This particular software application is used in every 50 states. We have the Canadian Border Police is using it, down to Australia, over to the UK, and now our military is now using it.
And do you provide support only to people locally in the metro Atlanta area, or do you have clients all over the place?
I'm all over the place.
Okay. And have you ever been tendered as an expert before?
I have.
And have you been tendered as an expert in forensic evaluation of electronic devices, both federally and at the state level?
I have.
And about how many times do you think you've testified as an expert over your career? Could you estimate?
I've lost count throughout the years, but I would say that out of that 2,400, probably in the neighborhood of 300 to 500.
All right. At this time, I would tender Jim Persinger as an expert in the forensic evaluation of electronic devices.
I'm very familiar, Mr. Persinger. I don't have any objection.
You may so testify.
I covered this just as a little bit, but I want to make this clear. You don't solely provide support to law enforcement, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you also do a lot of defense work as well?
I do.
Did that include criminal defense work on occasion?
It does.
Could you just estimate for us a breakdown of, how even that is, or whether there's one area that you provide more support to, generally speaking, through your practice?
I would say between prosecution and defense on the criminal side, probably more defense.
Okay. And I want to focus now on this particular case. You were engaged by the state, specifically the district attorney's office reached out to you. I believe I was the first contact. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. And you were asked to do some specific support work with the state and Cobb County Police Department in terms of the analysis of forensic devices, correct?
Correct.
Can you describe for the jury when it is that you started working on the case, generally speaking, and how you became involved?
I believe I was engaged in early July of 2014. And that started with meeting at Cobb County headquarters to discuss kind of an overview of what the data is that they had. And then trying to discover what it is they needed my assistance with, if anything.
And as part of your duties with PM investigations, is it routine when you're engaged by a law enforcement entity such as the District Attorney's Office for Cobb Police that you would meet, in fact, with some of the investigators involved?
Yes,
In this particular case, are you familiar with the high-tech crime unit with Cobb Police?
I am.
I'm curious, did you know any of those individuals such as Mr. Yeager, Detective Yeager, Pam Coulson? Did you know R.B. Smith prior to your work on this case?
Yes, I did.
And why don't you explain for the jury how it is that you knew them in advance of working on this case?
A combination of two things. I've been up against them in several cases, not only at the state level, but at the federal level. But I've also done training for law enforcement, and they've been in some of those classes.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about your work in this case, and let's start by talking about some general terms that I know are going to come up as we discuss your work. What's the difference between allocated versus unallocated space on an electronic device? Can you give that to us in kind of lay terms?
Yeah, allocated space is what you could see with the naked eye. Basically, you turn on the computer, you see the desktop. Doesn't take any magic, just turning on the computer, and you can see that information. That's the allocated. Unallocated space is what you can see with the forensic eye. It's deleted. It's gone out of the recycle bin. It is, in terms of where the data would be, as if your trash was actually taken to the city dump. So it's out of your control. You don't have access to it any longer. It's thrown away.
All right, I want to ask a little bit about two particular products that are on the market and see if you're familiar with them. We're going to start with Celebrite and then move into Encase. The jury's already heard some testimony about these two products. Are you familiar with those?
I am.
Let's start with Celebrite. Why don't you describe for the jury how you know what Celebrite is and what it does?
Well, Celebrite is kind of the de facto for looking at cell phone data. They actually started at your friendly cell phone provider, your Verizons, your AT&T. You go in, you want an upgrade, and you want to transfer your contacts to a new phone. Celebrite was behind the scenes doing that for you. They then moved into the forensic arena, seeing that there was a strong need to get the data off of phones in a kind of a proprietary format, but in a secured environment so that nothing would be changed or altered in that data. And they became the leader in that.
Do you use Celebrite yourself in your own investigations?
I do.
And talk a little bit about the importance of software updates when it comes to Celebrite, and then we'll get to Encase in just a second.
Software updates is critical in any investigations. As an example, field search, as I mentioned to you earlier, it's now version 5. Why has it changed? Because technology changes. But in addition to that, some software versions of that particular item may not be discovered. So when you do an update to the software, like in Celebrite or to field search, it finds new elements. It can actually find data that wasn't necessarily missed by the first one. It just didn't catch it. So using that update and rerunning it through the same software, it doesn't change that software. It just pulls out new information that you may have not seen before.
And as technology advances for apps and things like that, is Celebrite constantly working to decode those apps by using these software updates?
It is. In fact, just in the last 2 months, they've issued 3 different updates because they realize that not only new phones come to the market, but old apps have new information for investigations.
Okay. And a little bit about Encase as well. Describe the difference between Celebrite and Encase.
So your Encase is working more on your computer data, your memory sticks, your CD-ROMs, floppy disks if you still have those, and your thumb drives. They work in a totally different environment from one another. How they extract the information is kind of similar. It is protecting it. It's what we call using a write blocker, a fancy word for just preserving the information so that nothing changes. And it allows it to go kind of one way. It takes it from the original hard drive, moves it to a clean, brand new, never used hard drive so that we can investigate the data without changing the original. And that's where Encase, it's been around for years. In fact, it first started when Enron was first being investigated by an individual named Andy Rosen, a good friend of mine, who decided it was a time to create software that lets you get the data off of a hard drive without changing it.
I want to talk a little bit about going back to Celebrate in case and the importance of UTC, this jury's probably been UTC to death, but it's important that we make a record about it. Why is it important that we account for UTC when we do the analysis, particularly of cell phones, because of our happening to live in the United States?
Well, here's the thing to remember about cell phones versus a computer, an actual computer sitting on your floor. Mobile cell phones, it's mobile for a reason. I can take it across state lines. So some developers, when they develop an application that works on a cell phone, they don't always take into an account that you're mobile, that you're moving across a different time zone. So they always focus on that UTC, that Universal Time Coordination. And then they tell the investigator, you do the math. You decide if you're 4 hours or if you're 7 hours apart, and then come up with your timeline. Instead, what InCase is doing is, InCase, it does have settings where I can say my computer is in, California, for example, and I need to make adjustments. But it knows that generally where the investigator is, he knows that that hard drive is already local to him, so he doesn't have to make any real adjustments. He can trust the data from the hard drive being his time zone where the cell phone's portable and mobile.
Does Celebrite give you, the user, the option to account for daylight saving time and during the programs and features portion before analyzing a cell phone?
It does. It actually will prompt you with messages that says, we've detected that this is Eastern Standard Time, or that this device is reporting that it's in Pacific Standard Time, and that you must make the adjustment.
If you fail to make those adjustments, are you going to get the time wrong?
Yes, in fact, in our industry, we refer to it as the timeline is your heart line. If you're wrong by 4 hours because you're basing it over where the UK area is, when the cell phone's in here in Georgia, you're going to be off 4 hours in the summertime.
Is it important to cross-check in a criminal investigation and try to get maybe billing records or records from the cell phone provider to sort of cross-check and make sure that we have the accuracy in terms of timestamp?
Absolutely. Third-party information, such as your provider, is key. That helps you line up to make sure your math is done right.
Okay. I want to talk then about the call logs in this particular case. Did you at some point receive some items of evidence from Cobb Police and the District Attorney's Office to analyze and give support to us?
I did.
And why don't you describe what was provided to you and what you looked at?
I received what's called the Celebrite dump of the iPhone 5. The dump is everything that's on that device, everything that you can not only see with the naked eye, but the forensic eye. And then I got what we call the forensic images of a Mac computer and a Lenovo computer, a ThinkPad. Those are the two computer devices. Now there was some data that was delivered as well that was, I believe, if I recall correctly, an iPhone 4, but the focus was on the iPhone 5 as well as the two hard drives.
Okay. And were you able to access those devices? Were you able to use Celebrite on the phone? And were you able to use other applications to view the data that had been extracted from the Lenovo in particular and the other device?
Yes, I was.
And based on that, were you able to look through the data that was stored on those three items that were provided to you, copies obviously provided to you, such that you could give us support and answer questions that we may have about where things were located?
I was. And let me clarify a little bit that the copy, it's different than running something through a copy machine. It's what we call a forensic copy. There's a long math word that we refer to called hashing. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that unless that's where Mr. Evans goes, but hashing is the digital fingerprint of a hard drive, of a cell phone. And if I receive one that comes into my lab, the question I'll ask is, does the hash match the original? If they do, then I know I have a 100% copy of something to work from. If I don't, I got to go back and find out why. In this case, everything I received was not only verified and equal, but it was an exact match.
All right. I want to ask you a little bit about web activity from the iPhone 5. Were you able to look at the web activity for iPhone 5?
What little there was, yes.
And that's what I want to ask you about. why don't you explain for the jury, we've already heard some testimony about this, but what were the dates that were covered in terms of web activity on the iPhone 5 that you observed?
I saw 2 dates, the 17th and the 18th of June. There wasn't anything else.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. How is it that a cell phone might only show 2 dates of web activity if we know, for instance, from a screenshot that there have been prior searches?
It had to go through a manual deletion process. I not only know this because of the number of iPhones, but my son has one and I investigate his phone frequently. So I know that if I have missing history,
Your
it's
son,
through
by
a
the way, if
manual.
he's watching this, he knows now.
Doesn't know the tricks. I know that I'm missing history. So in this case, when I have only 2 dates to work with, I know there had to have been a manual deletion that had occurred.
Okay. Why do you say manual versus an automatic deletion? Just referring to the iPhone 5.
Well, the purpose of having your internet history, first of all, dates way back when Microsoft got smart. And I know that this is an iPhone and we're talking Apple, but the same principles still apply. You see, it used to be that when you went to a website, that it had to download every little piece to the device, and that took a long time. So they came out with this thing called caching. If the website doesn't change and you just want to go back to the website, it's faster to pull it up from your cache than it is to bring it down from your internet. Because of that cache, that's one of the first places we go investigate. Why? Because it gives us clues to our investigation. What is the user doing? And the lack of it tells us something's wrong, something's missing. So they tend to try to keep that history just as long as they can before it purges.
Let's talk a little bit about purging as well. Can you explain why it is that a device might purge automatically, and then we're going to ask about applications as well.
Well, one reason could be that the device is full, or it's approaching that full state. Remember, we talked a little bit about allocated and unallocated space. We've been cheated for years by the manufacturers of devices. When you buy a 16 gig iPhone, for example, you don't really get truly 16 gig. There's a portion of that that is controlled by the unallocated space. So the device has gotten smart. It says that when I start approaching my limits, start dumping the cache, because that the user doesn't necessarily need. He wants it, but he doesn't necessarily need it. So he starts dumping that information. But again, they tend to try to hold that just as long as they can because they want that customer to be happy with pulling back data. And also, if you think about the cache, and because it's coming up faster, you think you got a good connection.
All right. In this particular case, are you aware of the existence of a screenshot of the age of consent that predates June the 17th and June the 18th from the iPhone 5 extraction?
I know of it, I just don't know the details around it.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you about some specific activity on the MacBook Pro. Did you also look at the MacBook Pro?
I did briefly.
Okay. And are you aware of a search on how to survive in prison that was recovered from the MacBook Pro?
I am aware of that.
Okay. And were you asked to go and confirm that that existed on the MacBook Pro?
I did.
Do you recall the date on that by chance, the date of that search?
I don't, but what I do recall seeing that I believe it was in the unallocated space.
And explain the significance of being in the unallocated space, please.
Data only gets to the unallocated space 2 ways. One, the system starts to get full, doesn't see a need for it, starts to push it out there. Or the user actually goes through and says delete, and it will then go to the unallocated space.
Okay. While we're on the topic of deleting and purging, I want to ask you about defendant's Lenovo computer. Did you look at the data extracted from the computer to see if there was any sort of feature, particularly involving Google Chrome, that would affect our ability to get web searches off of that Were you able to find that on the Lenovo itself?
Yes,
In advance of court today, did you prepare several screenshots of what you found and then add some arrows to use as a demonstrative aid for what you were able to find?
I did.
Would it be assistance to you if we could display this to the jury so that they could see what you're talking about in terms of some of the features on the Apple MacBook Pro?
Absolutely.
So, looking first at say 918, 919, 920, 921, and then 922. Are these the screenshots as well as the demonstrative aids that you created to help assist what you found while looking at that MacBook Pro?
They are.
And this would assist you in explaining what you found to the jury if they were able to show it to them?
Absolutely.
And then states 923 is an electronic version of these, so we can display it on the Mondo pad. So at this time, I'll stand states 918 through 923.
Can I have an opportunity to walk with you?
Yes, sir.
What was the last number?
918 through 923. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I said MacBook Pro. Is that correct? It should be Lenovo. Is that correct?
That's correct.
My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Boyd.
That these items that you've offered in the evidence 918 through 923 are on the Lenovo?
Correct, and it says so on the items.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Persinger.
Good morning.
These items of evidence that have been identified by the state, when did you provide those to Mr. Evans?
Probably about 2 days ago.
I've never seen them before until this morning, so that's why I want to ask you just a couple of questions. Did you still have the forensic copy of this Lenovo to work from when you created these items of evidence?
Correct.
And when were you asked to create these items of evidence?
I wasn't asked.
And when did you first then discover on your own these items of evidence that you thought to turn over to Mr. Evans?
I thought about it about 3 days ago, a day before those were actually created. What sort of happened was, when I realized that the Chrome, the Google Chrome, which is a browser, and its history was not as complete, it was limited, I started asking my question, why? When a second browser that's on this computer called Firefox, made by Mozilla, was saturated. So it seemed like one browser was being used much more than the other one. And I couldn't figure out why one of them was so limited. So I went through what's called the preferences file. The preferences file of the Chrome actually tells you when the history was last deleted. And in this case, I saw that the Chrome history was last deleted on June the 6th of 2014, and the computers were actually collected by Cobb June 25th. So there's just a limited amount of days worth of usage that's showing that history made available, which answered my question of why the history was so limited. And I started digging further into this preferences file.
Understood. Now, in regards to these pieces of evidence that Mr. Evans has now offered, 918 through 923, have you done some follow-up investigation to know kind of the ins and outs about these items, and specifically the privacy VPN tunnel?
I have.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I don't have an objection.
Just since the topic was raised, could anyone, including the defense, if they had a copy of this data, pull up the same materials that you pulled up?
Yeah, there's really no magic in this. Here's a forensic trick. It was just to put that file, that preference file, in Notepad. notepad ships with every Windows computer, and I was able to read it.
Okay. But the defense, if they had a copy of the Lenovo extraction at any time prior to this week, they could have looked at this as well.
That's correct.
All right. With that, Judge, tender 9/18 through 9/23, did I catch that they were admitted?
There's no objection.
I just didn't hear the court say whether they were admitted or not, so. Okay, thank you, ma'am. With that, I'd like to publish 9/23, which is the disc. Mr. Persinger, I think it's going to be easier for you to do this if you come down and stand with me. Would you mind doing that? I'm just going to switch it this way. I hope we'll all be able to see it this way. Rotate it. All right, so let's start with this, and for our record, the first page that I have displayed up here, I actually want to go do this one. Let's pull them all, get them all. I think this is where we want to start. It came up in reverse. All right, sure. So, for our record, I'll give you a pointer. You show me where you want to show me which of these exhibits I'm holding in my hand you want to start with. Okay. So I believe that was probably the second one we pulled up. We're going to start with State's Exhibit 919. So there's a printed version for everybody to see. And let's find 919. It is going to be there. Okay, looking at State's 919, confirmed form, that's the one that's depicted up here in front of the jury, correct?
It is.
All right, let's talk about 919 and the significance of what we're looking at here. Can you describe first for the jury what we have here?
The preference file, if printed in its entirety, would be tens of pages long. So what I've done is taken just an excerpt from that for this exhibit. Now, in this whole section here is my screen capture. At the very top, you'll see where it says G, Harris, Chrome, etc. That's where it's on my forensic server. It has nothing to do with anybody else but my path. However, at the very end here, what A is pointing at says preferences, period, LPB BAK. Now, that is a preference backup file. You see, when you make changes to your preference file, it creates a backup for you. The main reason is, in case things go crazy, go bad, you have something to revert back to. So, we have a backup file. What we're pointing at in B is when that backup file was first created. In this case, it's April 21st, 2014 at 11:31 a.m. We move down to C. Now what C is showing us here is that there's a section in that preference file, and that section is called last clear browsing date time. Now, we all know that on our watch, we have 12-hour clocks or we have 24-hour clocks. When you introduce to something new, it's what we call a units clock. This bunch of numbers is built off of microseconds or nanoseconds or split-second seconds. It means nothing to us until we convert it. Then we can see what it actually translates to based on our clock. Well, what we see here in this little sub-window is a conversion of those numbers that's put in here where it says input to what the result of that is. Now, it's saying on April 18th, 2014, at 8:49 p.m., something in here changed. What is the change? The history had actually been cleared on that particular date. So we know that based on this alone, that there was a manual effort cleared. Why do we know that? We're dealing with Chrome. Chrome has a 90-day window. It keeps your history for 90 days. On 91 day, it's what we call FIFO, first in, first out. The data will slowly start to deplete itself on the 91st day, and it will keep that moving. This time period here tells us, on that date and time, somebody said, delete my history, a manual effort.
Is that because it was under the 90-day automatic deletion?
We wouldn't know that yet until we go to the next slide.
Okay. You want to see 920? All right, this is confirmed for me.
That is it.
920, which I've now displayed up to the jury. What does 920 show?
Can you shrink it down?
I can.
Move it up a tad. Okay. All right. So again, drawing your attention to D up here, forget the path. That's where it's on my machine. That's on my forensic server. What's more important is it just says preferences. Now, you'll note there's no file extension. That's just the way they do it. That's not another folder. It's a file with no extension, actually referred to as preference. That is the indication, that is the current preferences. If I turn on the computer even today, it would look and load whatever information is in this file to do whatever the browser needs to do. Now we jump down to E, 6/20/2014 at 2:37 p.m. Now, that's when that file had something change in it. Remember, I told you about the backup file? This is after that backup file, so something in this section, in this file, changed and caused it to get uploaded, or to update it. I moved down to F over here, last clear browsing data time. Remember, we saw that earlier in the last slide. The numbers are different. Why? Because it's now in the future. The future date of that, when I put it in, is on June 6, 2014 at 6:52 p.m. is when the last time the browser history was cleared. Now,
Give us that date again.
June 6, 2014 at 6:52 p.m. Now, what we know is that when Cobb received the computer and did their forensic image, it was on June 25th. So the last time that browser history was deleted on that date would only give me history from June 6th to June 25th when Cobb made their image. Again, limited amount of information. Not like Firefox, the other browser. It's a completely different environment. We have so much more in the Firefox than we have in the Chrome. It's almost like, I don't know, a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of environment, because we're clearing history here. That's the Mr. Hyde. The Dr. Jekyll part of it, the Firefox, saturated with history. We could look at that all day long and see just mounds of it. Very limited here.
Can you tell whether that was a manual deletion or whether that would have been something automatic because of Google Chrome?
That's the good question. You see, remember I told you that in Chrome we're 90 days. So even if I take this date versus the last date, I'm not 90 days. If I take this date, the June 6th, and the other date, it's not 90 days. It has to be a manual deletion process.
So June 6th would be a manual deletion then?
Correct.
All right. Looking at states, you want 918?
Yes.
Okay, let's look at 918. I'm going to ask you the significance of that file. Confirm first. Here we go. But that is 918 that's now displayed for the jury, correct?
Yes.
All right. Describe what 918 shows, please.
This is that side-by-side comparison with all the other stuff removed. What I want you to see is where you see this stuff in red, that's not me. What I've done is taken the old preference file, the current preference file, and put it in a program we call Beyond Compare. What the program does, if I handed you a 1,000-page Word document today, and last week I handed you a 1,000-page document and said, compare the two. Imagine the amount of time it would take you to see where the changes were. You'd have to read each one and then try to decide which one had changes to it. Beyond Compare does this automatically by highlighting red areas that says, hey Jim, there's a change there. So what you're seeing here is over here, April 21st is that backup file. Over here is June 20th. Over here, with the last browsing data time of when it was cleared is April 18th, 2014. Over here, we have June 6th, 2014. So we know between that two window right there, it was changed manually because it's inside 90 days. If the two of these had 90 days, I would say it was an automatic. But because it's inside the window of 90 days, it has to be manual.
And go to the next one. This is going to be 921, correct?
Yes.
I want to ask you about that. Okay, 921, confirm that is what's now displayed for the jury, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Describe the 921 and the significance of that, please.
A different section still in the preferences file. Now, again, on my left, over here, is the old preference file. Over here on the right is the current preference file. Remember, outside of this red arrow and the two word sentences down here, the red is the Beyond Compare application, putting them side by side and saying, hey Jim, something has changed here. For example, if I look over here, I have this www.griffinpsychology.com. Well, Griffin Psychology is in red. I come over here and I look through my list and I say, well, wait a minute, there it is. But it doesn't have the www dot in front of it. So it's changed. And I looked at that and I said, what is that website? I've never been there. So I go to that website and I found out that this deals with interviewing of witnesses, jury selection, forensic evaluations. That site specializes in that. So I look at this, I see a change, must have happened between 4/21 and June 20th. So I know this site changed, but that as far back as 4/21, he was going to that website.
Let me ask you about the red arrow that you have down here and what exactly it's pointing out.
Over here, it's blank. That means it wasn't there. It was non-existing. On 6/20/2014, we have this privateinternetaccess.com that now gets introduced into the preferences. Again, a site I had never been to before, so I did a little investigation on that. And we've got a slide for that, but basically what we see is not existing here, existing over here. I take the line just up from that, www.musiciansfriend.com and musiciansfriends.com. See, there's no change. So it existed back then, it exists today. When we see it missing and we see it here, this is new entry, this is new information in the preferences. This is like your favorites. It's not a bookmark per se, it's a favorite. That's where it gets added inside this little section.
States 922. Describe what 922 is, please.
It's going to be a screen capture of the private internet access.
Let's take a look at that. This is, I believe, what you were referring to, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes there's a delay. Hold on. There we go. Describe, well, first confirm, that's 922 that's being displayed for the jury, correct?
It is.
Okay. Just describe for the jury what 922 is.
It is a screen capture of the home page for the private internet access website. Again, I had never been there before. When I went there, what you can't necessarily see is up here at the top it says your IP address, and then there's a blur. When I went to it, the site captured my IP address. Don't know if you've been talked to at all about IP addresses, but it is like the address on your mailbox. It will help identify where you are physically in the scheme of the internet. Somebody sends a subpoena to Verizon or AT&T and they have an IP address, they can trace you back to your house. So up here, it would have shown my IP address. The next one that's blurred is the ISP, that's Internet Service Provider. It actually told me that I was AT&T, and that was correct. Now, what they do is they say, look, people can find you, people can track you, people can identify where you live. If you use this software, we will hide that for you. So VPN, Virtual Private Network, allows you to surf the internet without being detected, without being discovered. Somebody sends a subpoena to Google and says, where did Jim go today? Well, we don't show him having any activity. It could be using something like this. So it helps hide my identity on the internet, but it also self-contains part of my web history inside this tunnel so that nobody can see what I'm doing.
All right, sir. You should take your seat. In sum, looking at these documents and the screen captures that you have from the Lenovo, explain, would that assist somebody? Right. Would that assist somebody? Does this show that there was manual deletions on June 6th of 2014?
They do.
Okay. Let me ask you a little bit about some vacation questions, and you were asked to look into that for Lenovo, correct?
Correct.
And did you find any vacation activity or vacation search activity on Lenovo?
I did.
Okay. And describe how it is that you were able to do that research.
Once I got into the Firefox database that has your web history, it's almost as simple as just putting in the word vacation and it coming back. And I was able to see, again, because Firefox didn't have history deleted, it was all available. So searching it, came back. It then had those Unix time periods. I just needed to convert them, and it told me what date the person actually made that visit.
Okay, and there's been a lot of discussion here about some searches, and I don't need to bring all that evidence up. The defense has put in about searches for various places to potentially vacation. Did you find a search from June the 13th of 2014 on the Lenovo?
I did.
And can you describe how that search may have been different from some of the other searches that were discovered on the Lenovo?
If we're referring to the one that had 2 adults, 1 child, no child.
Yes.
Because I've been a web developer as well as, forensics and cybercrime and everything else, I've built a number of websites. I've learned how to read web code. And there's question marks that get used, there's quotes that get used, but basically if you take all that web code out of it, you can see clearly that in the link it will say number of adults equal 2, number of children equals 0.
Did you find a search from June the 13th of 2014 for a vacation to involve 2 adults and no children?
I did.
And did you find that on the Lenovo?
I did.
Judge, I'm having a hard time finding a piece of evidence. I have just a couple minutes to find that.
Sure.
Lenovo extraction. That's what I wanted to check. Just could I have 5 minutes? I think I made a mistake with the date, and I just want to check on something.
Let's take a break, ladies and gentlemen. Step outside. Close your notepads, keep an open